The engine roared to life, and the GPS chimed, "Head west on Interstate 10. It was supposed to be an ordinary road trip with friends, a chance to escape the chaos of Austin and dive into the serenity of Sedona. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Wyatt adjusted the rearview mirror, flashing his signature smile. Beside him, in the passenger seat, Kendra, my best friend since college, scrolled through a playlist. In the back seat, Logan, Kendra's husband, stretched his legs and cracked a joke about how this trip would rekindle old sparks. I laughed, but a part of me wondered what he meant by that. The road stretched endlessly before us, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast Texas landscape. Conversation flowed easily, like it always did with the four of us. We'd been friends for years, barbecues, game nights, even the occasional double date. This trip was meant to be a celebration of that bond, a shared adventure to strengthen the connections we all valued so much. Wyatt and Kendra debated over which playlist to play, their laughter filling the car. I watched the two of them. Something small and unnameable twisting in my chest as I caught a glance too long between them. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed it, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. "This view is going to be insane once we hit Arizona," Logan said, leaning forward between the seats. His voice had that playful tone, the one he used when he wanted to steer the conversation. "Anyone up for camping under the stars when we get there?" Wyatt jumped at the idea. "I'm game. Tamsin, you love that stuff, right?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was agreeing to the camping or just the idea of keeping everyone happy. Kendra threw a glance over her shoulder, her green eyes lighting up. "Let's do it. Just imagine it. Us. A fire. And nothing but the stars." "Sounds perfect," I said, trying to match their enthusiasm. As the miles ticked by, I found myself replaying a conversation Logan had brought up the night before. Over drinks at their place, he'd casually mentioned how some couples try new things to keep the excitement alive. At the time, I brushed it off as one of his random comments, but now, sitting in that car, I wasn't so sure. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this journey unfolds. There's a twist you'll never see coming. We stopped for lunch at a diner somewhere outside Fort Stockton. The place was all retro charm, checkerboard floors, red vinyl booths, and a jukebox playing old country tunes. While Wyatt and Logan ordered burgers at the counter, Kendra slid into the seat across from me. "Excited about Sedona?" she asked, stirring her soda with a straw. "Definitely. You?" She hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Wyatt. "Yeah, it'll be fun. It's good to get away, you know." Her words felt layered, but before I could ask more, the guys returned with trays piled high with food. Conversation turned to the landmarks we planned to visit: Devil's Bridge, Cathedral Rock, the Chapel of the Holy Cross. The tension I'd felt earlier dissolved into laughter and easy chatter as we piled back into the car. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and purple. Wyatt held my hand as he drove, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. For a moment, I let myself believe everything was perfect. But then I caught Logan's reflection in the rearview mirror. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. And just like that, the feeling was back, the sense that something was shifting between us, something we couldn't yet name. The restaurant we found was tucked away on a quiet Sedona street, its glowing lanterns and rustic charm drawing us in like moths to a flame. Inside, the scent of wood-fired pizza and fresh herbs filled the air, blending with the murmur of conversations and the soft hum of live acoustic music. It was the perfect place to unwind after a day of trekking through red rocks and dusty trails. As we settled at our table near a window overlooking the glowing red cliffs, I couldn't help but notice how relaxed everyone seemed. Kendra and Logan leaned toward each other, laughing about something Wyatt had said during the hike. Meanwhile, Wyatt scanned the menu with the intensity of someone trying to solve a riddle. "Everything here looks amazing," Kendra declared, finally setting her menu aside. "How do we even choose?" "Easy," Logan quipped. "Order one of everything and figure it out later." The server arrived with a round of craft beers, and the mood grew even lighter. By the time our food arrived, piping hot flatbreads, roasted vegetables, and a massive plate of pasta, we were in high spirits, trading jokes and stories about the day's adventures. It was during dessert, a rich chocolate torte that melted on the tongue, that Kendra veered the conversation into unexpected territory. "You know," she began, her tone playful but her eyes sharp, "I read this article the other day about how some couples keep things interesting by experimenting." I froze mid-bite, suddenly hyper-aware of the charged atmosphere at the table. Wyatt chuckled nervously, and Logan leaned back in his chair with a sly grin. "What kind of experimenting?" Logan asked, clearly enjoying the direction this was taking. Kendra shrugged, feigning casualness. "Oh, you know, trying new things, pushing boundaries, stuff like that." Wyatt joined in, his voice light but curious. "Like what? Swing dancing? Bungee jumping?" Kendra laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Not quite, more like exploring different dynamics. Some people even try partner swaps to spice things up." My heart skipped a beat. It was all in good fun, I told myself, just harmless banter among friends. But there was something about the way Kendra looked at Wyatt, her lips curling into a smile that felt almost like a challenge. "People actually do that?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Apparently," Kendra said, reaching for her glass of wine. "It's supposed to build trust and deepen connections or something like that." Logan smirked. "Sounds like a team-building exercise gone rogue." The table erupted in laughter, and for a moment, the tension dissolved. But when Logan leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across all of us, the playfulness in his expression turned to something more serious. "Why not try something new while we're here?" he suggested. "This trip is about making memories, right? What better way than stepping out of the ordinary?" I forced a smile, unsure how to respond. His words hung in the air, their meaning deliberately ambiguous. Kendra gave a small nod of approval, and even Wyatt seemed intrigued, his eyes darting between Logan and me. Before I could fully process what was happening, Kendra changed the subject, steering us back into safer territory. But the lingering subtext of the conversation stayed with me, like a faint echo I couldn't shake. As we left the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air, Logan turned to the group. "Tomorrow, let's do that camping night we talked about. Just us and the stars. What do you all think?" Everyone agreed enthusiastically, their voices blending into a chorus of excitement. I nodded along, though my stomach churned with a mix of curiosity and unease. Was I overthinking everything, or was there something more to this trip than I had realized? The campsite was perched on the edge of a canyon, with Sedona's towering red rock formations silhouetted against a night sky so clear it seemed endless. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine and the faint smokiness of our campfire. I busied myself setting up our tent, trying to shake off the unease that had been trailing me since dinner. Kendra and Logan worked in sync as they assembled their tent nearby, their quiet chatter punctuated by laughter. Wyatt, on the other hand, seemed unusually quiet, focusing on hammering stakes into the rocky ground. The silence between us felt different, less companionable, more weighted, as if both of us were carefully avoiding a subject we hadn't agreed to discuss. Once the tents were pitched, we gathered around the fire, its orange glow flickering across our faces. Logan tossed another log onto the flames, sending sparks spiraling into the night. The warmth was welcome, but the atmosphere around the fire felt charged with something I couldn't quite name. As we sat, sipping on lukewarm coffee from tin mugs, Logan leaned back against a rock and let out a contented sigh. "This is perfect," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Just the four of us, no distractions, no expectations." Kendra smiled, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's nice to just be," she added, glancing around the circle. "No work emails, no deadlines. Just us." There was an unspoken agreement in the air. This moment was supposed to feel easy and natural. Yet, every glance and every pause in conversation felt like it carried a double meaning. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was building, like the tension before a storm. It was Logan who broke the fragile peace. "You know," he began, his tone casual but deliberate. "Kendra and I were talking earlier about how lucky we are to have friends like you two. People we can trust completely." I glanced at Kendra, who was nodding in agreement, her expression open and inviting. "Not everyone has that," she said. "That kind of trust, I mean. It's rare." Wyatt shifted beside me, his hand brushing against mine. I could feel the heat of his body even through the blanket we shared, but instead of comfort, it only heightened my awareness of the moment. "Trust is everything," Logan continued, his eyes flicking between me and Wyatt. "And sometimes, to build trust, you have to step outside your comfort zone. You have to push boundaries." Kendra leaned forward, her face illuminated by the firelight. "Exactly. Sometimes doing something different, something a little crazy, can bring people closer together." My pulse quickened as their words began to take shape, forming an idea I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. I glanced at Wyatt, hoping for a sign that I was imagining things, but his expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on the fire. "What are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Logan smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. "Just a thought. Something that could be fun, and maybe even strengthen what we have as friends." Kendra reached for Logan's hand, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. "What if," she began, her voice soft but deliberate, "we tried something new? Just for tonight, to see how it feels." I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. Wyatt was the first to speak. "You mean like switching partners?" Kendra nodded, her expression calm, almost reassuring. "Just for tonight. No strings, no expectations, just an adventure." The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as a bad joke, but the way Logan and Kendra looked at us, earnest, almost vulnerable, told me they were completely serious. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's a big step." Logan leaned forward, his gaze meeting mine. "Tamsin, we'd never suggest something that would hurt anyone. This is about trust, about exploring something together, as friends." I turned to Wyatt, searching his face for a reaction. To my surprise, he didn't look shocked or hesitant. If anything, he seemed intrigued. "What do you think?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "I mean, if everyone's on the same page, it could be interesting. My stomach tightened, a mix of disbelief and something I couldn't quite name. Was it curiosity, or was it the fear of being the only one to say no? The discussion continued, each of us carefully weighing our words, testing the boundaries of what we were willing to admit. Logan and Kendra framed it as an adventure, a harmless experiment that could bring us closer. Wyatt's enthusiasm was clear, though he tried to temper it for my sake. In the end, I found myself nodding, though my heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest. The agreement was made, tentative but binding, like an invisible thread connecting the four of us in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. As the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the campsite, I couldn't help but wonder if we were crossing a line we could never uncross. But, for now, there was no turning back. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting the campsite in a warm, dim light that made the world feel smaller, as if nothing existed beyond our little circle. Logan stood, brushing off his hands, his movements deliberate, yet casual. "I think it's time we turned in," he said, his voice low but clear. I glanced at Wyatt, who met my eyes briefly before looking away. His expression held something unreadable, a mix of eagerness and apprehension. Kendra stood and stretched, the firelight dancing off her silhouette. She exchanged a quick look with Logan, a silent agreement passing between them. My heart pounded in my chest as I rose to my feet, following Logan toward one of the tents. The air was cool against my skin, and each step felt heavier than the last, as if my body were aware of the gravity of what was about to happen. Logan held the tent flap open for me, his movements gentle but deliberate, and I stepped inside, acutely aware of the quiet that enveloped us. Inside the tent, the space was small and intimate, the faint scent of pine and campfire lingering in the air. Logan zipped the flap shut, sealing us in. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence amplifying the sound of my racing heartbeat. "Are you okay?" Logan asked, his voice soft and steady. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was answering truthfully. "This is different," I said, my words feeling inadequate for the swirl of emotions inside me. Logan smiled, a calm, reassuring expression that somehow made the moment feel less daunting. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," he said, his tone genuine. "This is about trust, remember?" The sincerity in his voice eased some of my tension, though it didn't quell the electric charge that had settled between us. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, the warmth of his touch grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. "Then let's just take it slow," he said, his eyes meeting mine. There was a tenderness in his gaze, an attentiveness that felt disarming. He stepped closer, his movements unhurried, giving me time to process each moment. When his hand cupped my face, I didn't pull away. Instead, I closed my eyes, letting the sensation wash over me. The first kiss was tentative, a gentle brush of lips that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't hurried or forceful. It was an exploration, a question asked without words. When I responded, meeting his kiss with my own, it felt like an answer. Logan's hands moved to my shoulders, then down my arms, his touch light yet deliberate. There was a precision to his movements, as if he were carefully reading my reactions. I felt myself leaning into him, the warmth of his body a stark contrast to the cool night air. As the moments stretched on, the connection between us deepened, each kiss more insistent than the last. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my palms. There was something grounding about it, a reminder that this moment was real, not a dream. Logan guided me gently to the sleeping bag spread out on the tent floor, his movements careful and considerate. The intimacy of the space, combined with the quiet of the night, made everything feel amplified. The brush of his fingers against my skin, the sound of our breaths mingling, the warmth of his touch. He took his time, each action deliberate and unhurried, as if he were savouring every moment. There was no rush, no urgency, only a shared understanding that this was a moment to be experienced fully. His attentiveness surprised me, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. As we explored each other's boundaries, I found myself letting go of the doubts and hesitations that had plagued me earlier. Logan's focus on my comfort and pleasure made it easy to lose myself in the moment, to forget about the complexities that awaited us outside the tent. For the first time, in what felt like forever, I felt truly present, unburdened by the weight of expectations or responsibilities. Logan's touch was both grounding and liberating, a paradox that left me feeling more alive than I had in years. The night stretched on, each moment blending into the next in a haze of warmth and connection. Logan's quiet confidence and attentiveness created a space where I felt safe to explore my own desires, to step outside the confines of what I thought I knew about myself and my relationship. As the hours passed, I found myself marveling at the ease with which we connected, the way he seemed to understand my unspoken needs and respond to them without hesitation. It was a stark contrast to the familiarity of my relationship with Wyatt, where comfort often overshadowed passion. When we finally lay side by side, the tent bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the fabric, I felt a strange mix of contentment and confusion. Logan's arm draped over me, his breathing steady and calm, as if this moment were as natural to him as any other. I stared at the ceiling of the tent, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. There was no guilt, no immediate regret, only a quiet curiosity about what this night meant for all of us. The boundary we had crossed felt less like a line in the sand and more like a door we had chosen to walk through together. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if this moment would change everything, or if it was simply a fleeting experience, a spark in the vast expanse of our shared history. For now, the answers didn't matter. All that mattered was the warmth of Logan's presence beside me and the quiet hum of the night surrounding us. The first light of dawn seeped through the fabric of the tent, casting a soft, pale glow over everything. I stirred awake, the cool morning air brushing against my face. Logan lay beside me, his expression peaceful, his breathing steady. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to bask in the calm, pretending everything was as simple as the rising sun. But reality quickly returned, like an unwelcome knock at the door. I slipped out of the tent quietly, the ground cold beneath my feet. The campsite was still, except for the occasional chirp of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I noticed Wyatt at the far edge of the site, crouched by the fire pit, poking at the embers. He was humming softly to himself, a tune I didn't recognize. His demeanor was almost too relaxed, his movements deliberate, yet overly cheerful. Kendra emerged from her tent moments later, her eyes darting toward Wyatt before quickly looking away. She wrapped her arms around herself, her usual confident air replaced by a reserved hesitancy. Logan stepped out shortly after, stretching and flashing me a quick, easy smile that made my chest tighten. His calmness felt so out of place in the midst of the subtle tension swirling around us. "Morning!" Wyatt called out brightly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Who's ready for breakfast? I'm thinking we finish up those eggs and sausages before they go bad." I forced a smile and nodded, though my appetite was non-existent. Kendra muttered something about needing coffee first, and Logan simply shrugged, his relaxed demeanor unshaken. As we gathered around to eat, the atmosphere felt strange, like a performance where everyone was playing their part, but the script was missing. Wyatt's jokes seemed louder than necessary, as if he were compensating for something. Kendra barely touched her food, her fork absently poking at her scrambled eggs. "So, did everyone sleep okay?" Logan asked casually, his tone betraying no sign of discomfort. "Like a rock," Wyatt replied with an exaggerated grin, clapping Logan on the back. "Camping always does that for me. Must be the fresh air." I nodded along, not trusting myself to speak. My thoughts were a tangle of uncertainty and lingering sensations from the night before. Every glance, every movement felt weighted, as though an unspoken question hung in the air. After breakfast, we began packing up the campsite. Wyatt took charge, his energy almost manic as he busied himself with folding tents and organizing supplies. Kendra stayed unusually quiet, sticking close to her own tasks without engaging much with the group. Logan, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered, moving through the motions with his usual calm efficiency. I tried to focus on packing, but my mind kept drifting. The night before had felt surreal, almost like stepping into a different world, and now the daylight was exposing all the cracks. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just between Wyatt and me, but within the group as a whole. As I rolled up my sleeping bag, Kendra approached me, her movements hesitant. She glanced over her shoulder, as if to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Hey," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Are we still good?" The question caught me off guard, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Her tone was careful, almost pleading, and it sent a ripple of unease through me. "Of course," I said quickly, the words tumbling out before I could think them through. Kendra nodded, but her expression didn't fully relax. "Okay, just checking." As she walked away, I couldn't help but replay the conversation in my mind. Her question seemed simple enough, but it carried a weight I couldn't quite place. Were we good? I wasn't sure I even knew what that meant anymore. The drive back to the main road was quieter than I expected. Wyatt, who had been so boisterous earlier, finally settled into a more subdued mood, his focus shifting to the playlist he'd queued up for the ride. Kendra stared out the window, her face unreadable, while Logan hummed softly along with the music, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. I tried to focus on the scenery, the red rocks and desert vistas that had enchanted me just the day before. But my mind kept returning to Kendra's question, to the lingering looks and awkward silences that seemed to say more than words ever could. As we pulled into a small roadside diner for a quick coffee break, I found myself watching the others closely, searching for clues in their expressions and interactions. Logan remained his usual self, unfazed and composed. Wyatt's cheerfulness had faded into a more neutral demeanor, though his eyes avoided meeting mine for too long. Kendra kept to herself, her fingers tapping absently on the table as she sipped her coffee. The tension wasn't overt, but it was there, simmering just beneath the surface. And as much as I tried to push it aside, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The events of the previous night had seemed harmless in the moment, but now the aftermath felt far more complicated than any of us had anticipated. When we finally piled back into the car and continued our journey, I leaned my head against the window, watching the desert landscape blur past. The silence between us was no longer comfortable. It was heavy, filled with unsaid words and unresolved emotions. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm in my mind. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. This trip wasn't going to end the way any of us had expected. The drive back into Sedona felt longer than it should have. The car filled with an unsettling quiet that no one seemed willing to break. I stared out the window, watching the jagged red rocks shift and sway with each turn, their beauty now shadowed by the knot of unease in my stomach. What once felt like an adventurous escape now seemed like an elaborate game we were all losing, though no one would admit it. Wyatt was unusually silent, his hands resting limply on his lap as he scrolled through his phone. Every so often, his fingers moved rapidly, typing out messages I couldn't see. "Group plans," he mumbled when I glanced his way, not looking up. The explanation was casual, dismissive, but it didn't sit right. When we arrived back at the rental house, everyone retreated to their corners, the unspoken agreement to take some space palpable. Wyatt headed straight to the patio, phone still in hand, while Kendra claimed the kitchen, busily rearranging items that didn't need organizing. Logan lingered in the living room, his relaxed demeanor oddly comforting despite the growing tension. I tried to lose myself in a book, but found the words blurring together. Wyatt's distant behavior gnawed at me, the easy closeness we once shared feeling further away with every passing minute. Each laugh, each glance from the night before seemed like a jagged piece of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered for dinner, a strained effort to maintain normalcy. Kendra was unusually quiet, her fork scraping her plate without ever lifting food to her mouth. Logan, as always, filled the silences, spinning light-hearted stories that felt increasingly like an act. Wyatt smiled at the appropriate moments, but his laughter lacked sincerity, and his eyes flicked toward his phone whenever he thought no one was watching. I couldn't stop myself from noticing the way Kendra and Wyatt seemed to avoid each other's gaze, yet their phones seemed to buzz in tandem, the occasional smirk or furrow of a brow betraying the supposed innocence of their conversations. It wasn't the texting itself that bothered me. It was the feeling of being shut out, as though something significant was unfolding, just out of reach. "Everyone still up for tomorrow's hike?" Logan asked, breaking the tension with his signature charm. His eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. I nodded automatically, though my enthusiasm was half-hearted. Wyatt shrugged, muttering something about needing to check the trail maps, while Kendra responded with a vague, maybe. As the night wore on, I found myself drawn to Logan's effortless ease. His comments became slightly more personal, his jokes tinged with a flirtation that felt both familiar and foreign. At first, I chalked it up to his natural charisma, but as the evening progressed, the glances lasted a little longer, the compliments landing a little closer to home. "Do you remember that time we all went rafting last summer?" Logan asked, leaning back in his chair, his gaze steady on me. "You were fearless. Probably saved us from tipping over with how quick you reacted." I laughed, the memory faint but warm. "Pretty sure you're giving me too much credit. I was panicking the whole time." "Didn't look like it," he replied, his smile soft but deliberate. Wyatt's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "I'm going to bed," he announced, his tone clipped. "Already?" Logan quipped, raising an eyebrow. "Big day tomorrow, man. You should stick around for a bit." Wyatt shook his head, not meeting my gaze. "Nah, I'm beat." Bite. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall, leaving the rest of us in a thick, uncomfortable silence. Kendra excused herself soon after, retreating to her room without so much as a glance in my direction. Logan and I lingered in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. His presence felt both steady and unsettling, like standing on the edge of something you couldn't quite see. "You okay?" he asked finally, his voice lower now that we were alone. I hesitated, the question simple but loaded. "I don't know," I admitted. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You can talk to me, you know, about anything." There was something in his tone, a mix of sincerity and something else I couldn't quite place. For a moment, I considered telling him everything, unloading the weight of my unease and confusion. But the words stayed trapped, too tangled to untangle. "I know," I said instead, my voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, the unease lingered, thicker now that the initial shock of our return had worn off. Wyatt was distant, his interactions with me reduced to polite small talk. Kendra avoided eye contact altogether, her movements purposeful but detached. Logan, meanwhile, remained his usual self, though his attention toward me felt more focused, his gestures more intentional. I couldn't tell if it was comforting or unnerving, maybe both. As the hours stretched on, I found myself questioning everything. The easy camaraderie we once shared as a group felt irreparably fractured, replaced by something fragile and unsteady. Every glance, every word felt laced with subtext, as though we were all navigating a minefield we'd created together. I sat on the patio that afternoon, the sun warm on my skin, but doing little to ease the chill in my chest. Wyatt was inside, his muffled voice carrying faintly through the glass door as he spoke on the phone. Kendra had disappeared on a solo walk, while Logan lounged in a hammock nearby, scrolling through his own phone. The cracks were undeniable now, each one threatening to widen into something impossible to repair. And though I couldn't quite put my finger on it, I had the sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. The air in the house was heavy with unspoken words as our last night in Sedona crept in. Despite the tension that had hung over us since the campsite, we all found ourselves gathered in the living room, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. A bottle of wine circulated, loosening tongues and softening the edges of an otherwise uncomfortable evening. Logan suggested a game, something light to break the awkwardness. "Let's do confessions," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nothing serious, just fun little secrets." Wyatt hesitated, swirling his drink in his glass. "Sounds risky," he muttered, but no one objected. Maybe we all felt the need to let something out, even if none of us wanted to admit it. The questions started harmless enough. Childhood crushes, embarrassing moments, silly fears. Laughter spilled out, tentative but genuine, as we shared fragments of our pasts. For a brief moment, it felt like we were inching toward the closeness we once had. But then, the questions turned deeper. "What's something you've been hiding from the group?" Logan asked, his voice calm, though his gaze flicked briefly to me. The room fell silent, the weight of his question pressing down on us. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward Kendra before settling on the floor. "Doesn't have to be dark," Logan added quickly. "Just something we don't know yet." Kendra broke the silence first, her voice steady, but her words careful. "I've been thinking about switching careers," she said, forcing a smile. "Something completely different, maybe even abroad." Logan nodded, accepting her answer without pressing further. His gaze moved to Wyatt. "What about you?" he asked. Wyatt cleared his throat, his fingers tapping nervously against his glass. "Well," he began, his voice shaky, "Kendra and we've been meeting up before the trip, just to, plan some things." The room froze. I felt my heart drop, the casual way he said it landing like a punch to the gut. What things? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He hesitated, glancing at Kendra as if waiting for her permission to continue. You know, just ideas for the camping trip and other stuff. The room's atmosphere shifted. Logan leaned forward, his expression unreadable, while Kendra's face flushed a deep red. Wyatt, stop dancing around it, Logan said quietly. If you're going to say it, just say it. Wyatt sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. We were talking about exploring, like what we ended up doing, but it wasn't supposed to mean anything, it was just an idea. My stomach churned. The weight of his words settled heavily on my chest, a bitter mixture of betrayal and disbelief washing over me. So, this whole thing was planned? I asked, my voice shaking. Even before we got here? It wasn't like that, Wyatt said quickly. We just wanted to see if it could work for all of us. We thought it would bring us closer. Closer? The irony was almost laughable. I opened my mouth to respond, but Logan spoke first. And here, I thought spontaneity was part of the fun, he said dryly, his gaze shifting to me. But since we're all sharing, I might as well get this off my chest. Tamsin, I've had feelings for you, long before this trip. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I blinked, unsure I'd heard him right. What? He shrugged, his expression softer now. I didn't act on them. I knew you were with Wyatt, and I didn't want to ruin anything. But after everything that's happened, I guess I couldn't keep it in anymore. I sat back, the room spinning as I tried to process it all. Wyatt and Kendra's secret meetings, Logan's confession. The fragile web of trust that once held us together had unraveled completely, leaving nothing but raw, exposed truths. You knew, I said to Kendra, my voice barely above a whisper. You knew about Wyatt, and you didn't say anything? Kendra's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. The night dissolved into fragments of raised voices and hushed apologies, none of which seemed to land. Every attempt to explain, justify, or smooth things over only made the cracks in our foundation deeper. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, the weight of the evening pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. I excused myself, stepping out onto the patio and into the cool night air. The stars above were as brilliant as ever, indifferent to the chaos unfolding below. I stood there for what felt like hours, the voices inside muffled and distant. My mind raced, replaying the events of the trip over and over, searching for signs I'd missed, clues I should have seen. Logan joined me after a while, his presence silent but steady. I didn't mean to make things harder, he said quietly. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. By the time I returned to the house, the others had retreated to their rooms, the tension now replaced by an eerie stillness. I lay awake in bed that night, the revelations replaying in my mind like a broken record. Betrayal, regret, confusion, they all swirled together, leaving me unsure of what to feel or where to go from here. All I knew was that something had changed, and there was no going back to the way things were. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I needed space to process, to breathe, to figure out what this trip had meant and what it hadn't. For now, that was all I could do. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling and emotional tales. Your support means the world. If you'd like to show some extra love, consider donating through the Super Thanks button below. And if you want to join our community and get exclusive content, click the Join button for amazing perks. Thank you for being a part of this journey.